Welcome, dear listeners, to another enchanting episode of Mythical Tales. I'm delighted to have you join me tonight as we embark on a mystical journey that will transport you to realms where magic and reality intertwine. Before we begin our tale, if you're enjoying these stories, please consider subscribing to our channel. It helps us bring more legends to life for you every week. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight. Please leave a comment telling me your city and country. It's always magical to see how these ancient tales connect people across continents and oceans, creating a community of dreamers around the globe. Tonight, we dive into the haunting legend of the Lady of the Lake and the Mortal Warrior, a tale that has echoed through centuries in various cultures. From the mists of Avalon in Arthurian legend to the enchanted waters of Norse mythology, mysterious women dwelling in lakes have long captured human imagination. These ethereal beings, neither fully human nor entirely divine, exist at the threshold between worlds. They guard ancient wisdom and magical artifacts, appearing to mortals only when destiny calls. Their beauty is said to be otherworldly, with skin like moonlight on water and voices that flow like gentle streams. In many traditions, these lake guardians serve as messengers between realms, offering gifts of power to chosen mortals. But as our story will reveal, such gifts often carry hidden costs. The boundary between blessing and curse blurs like ripples across still water. Our tale tonight takes place in a time when the veil between the mortal realm and the magical world was thinner, when brave warriors still roamed ancient forests, and when the gods walked more closely with humankind. It is a story of power and sacrifice, of glory and doom, of a mortal heart forever changed by immortal waters. So settle in, close your eyes, and let your mind drift like a leaf on gentle currents. Let the sounds of my voice carry you to a kingdom, long forgotten, where our story begins with a warrior whose name would one day be whispered with both awe and sorrow. In the northern reaches of a land whose name has long been lost to time, stood the proud kingdom of Ardenmere. Nestled between ancient mountains and dark forests, this realm was known for its fierce warriors and steadfast people, who had survived countless harsh winters and border skirmishes with neighboring territories. The kingdom was ruled by wise king Edric, whose silver crown sat heavily upon his aging brow. Though peace had blessed Ardenmere for several years, the king grew increasingly concerned about rumors of raiders from across the eastern sea. Every day, scouts returned with whispers of strange ships spotted near distant shores. It was in these uncertain times that our warrior Thorne had risen to prominence in the king's guard. Unlike many of his brothers in arms who came from noble lineage, Thorne was born to a humble blacksmith in a village at the edge of the great forest. His path to glory had been carved through exceptional skill and unwavering determination rather than birthright. Thorne stood tall among his peers, with shoulders broad from years at the forge before he took up the sword. His hair was dark as raven's wings, and his eyes, a startling blue that reminded elders of mountain lakes, seemed to pierce through deception and fear alike. Though only 30 winters had passed since his birth, his reputation as Ardenmere's most capable defender had spread throughout the kingdom. What distinguished Thorne was not merely his prowess in battle, but a quality rarer still among warriors: contemplation. While others spent their evenings boasting of conquests or drowning in mead, Thorne could often be found walking alone beneath the stars or studying ancient texts in the castle's modest library. His fellow guards jested that he fought like a demon, but thought like a monk. Despite the respect he commanded, Thorne felt increasingly restless, haunted by dreams he couldn't interpret, visions of shimmering depths calling to him. Each morning he would wake with the sensation of water filling his lungs, though his bed remained dry. These dreams had begun 3 moons past, growing more vivid with each passing night. "The gods are trying to tell you something," the old court mystic had told him when he reluctantly sought counsel. "Water dreams speak of change, of depths within yourself yet unexplored. Perhaps you are meant for something beyond these castle walls." The mystic's words had only deepened Thorne's unease. Little did he know that the dreams were indeed a calling, the first tendrils of magic reaching from another realm to touch his mortal mind, preparing him for an encounter that would forever alter his destiny. The dreams grew so persistent that Thorne decided to seek their source, requesting leave from his duties to embark on a solitary hunting expedition. King Edric, noting the shadows of fatigue beneath his trusted warrior's eyes, granted the request. 7 days, the king said. Return with your mind cleared and your strength renewed. Thorne travelled deeper into the forest than he had ever ventured before, following an inexplicable pull that seemed to tug at his very soul. The ancient trees grew denser here, their massive trunks covered in moss so thick it muffled all sound. Time seemed to move differently beneath these ageless sentinels, the light filtering through the canopy in strange, ethereal patterns. On the third day, as the afternoon sun began its descent, Thorne heard it. The soft music of water gently lapping against shores. It wasn't the rushing sound of the rivers he knew, but something more rhythmic, almost like breathing. Following the sound, he pushed through a curtain of hanging vines and found himself standing at the edge of a perfect circular lake. The water was unlike any he had ever seen, clear as crystal, yet somehow impossibly deep, reflecting the sky above, while simultaneously revealing glimpses of another world below. No wind disturbed its surface, yet small ripples occasionally appeared, as if the lake itself were alive and stirring in its sleep. Surrounding the water was a ring of white stones, each carved with symbols Thorne couldn't recognize but somehow felt he should understand. As the warrior stood transfixed by the sight, the air around the center of the lake began to shimmer. The surface bulged upward, water rising without splashing, forming the outline of a woman. Thorne's hand instinctively moved to his sword, but some deeper instinct kept him from drawing it. This was no threat, at least not one steel could protect against. She emerged gradually, water sliding off her form like liquid silver. First a crown of shells and pearls, then a face of such otherworldly beauty that Thorne felt his heart constrict painfully in his chest. Her skin glowed with an inner light that shifted between the pale blue of shallow waters and the deep azure of ocean depths. Her hair, indistinguishable from the water itself, flowed around her in defiance of natural law. When her eyes opened to regard him, eyes that contained all the mysteries of unfathomable depths, Thorne fell to his knees. Not in fear, though. Fear certainly coursed through him, but in recognition of something his conscious mind couldn't yet comprehend. He was in the presence of power far greater than any mortal king or queen. Thorne of Ardenmere. Her voice came not as sound but as ripples across his thoughts, cool water flowing through the channels of his mind. Long have I watched you through the streams and rivers of your land. Long have I called to you in dreams. At last, you have answered. Rise, warrior, the lady commanded, her voice like water flowing over smooth stones. You need not kneel before me. I have summoned you as an equal, not as a subject. As Thorne stood, the lady extended her hand. Come, there is much I wish to show you. Before he could question or resist, the lake's surface parted beneath her feet, creating a shimmering staircase that descended into the depths. Every instinct warned against following a mysterious being into unknown waters. Yet Thorne found himself stepping forward as if in a trance. The moment his foot touched the first watery step, a strange transformation began. His lungs expanded, filling not with drowning panic but with a cool, refreshing sensation that allowed him to breathe. Descending into the lake was like entering another world entirely. What had appeared as ordinary water from above revealed itself as the boundary between realms. Thorne gazed in wonder at the underwater kingdom spreading before him, a vast civilization built of coral palaces, structures of pearl and crystal, gardens of swaying anemones in colors no surface flower could match. This is Nimeriel, the lady said, gesturing to the expanse around them. The eternal realm beneath the waters. What your people glimpse as lakes and rivers are merely the thinnest veils between your world and mine. Schools of luminescent. Fish swam through elaborate archways, casting moving patterns of light across the scene. Underwater beings, some resembling humans with fish-like features, others defying any classification Thorne could imagine, moved about their daily activities, occasionally stopping to stare at the mortal visitor. Our kingdom exists wherever. Water flows, she explained as they walked along a path of iridescent shells. From the smallest raindrop to the vast oceans, all are connected in ways your mortal sciences cannot comprehend. We are the guardians of water's wisdom, the keepers of its memory since the first rains fell upon your world. The lady guided him through marvelous wonders, libraries where books made of thin crystal sheets contained knowledge from the dawn of time, forges where craftsmen worked with liquid metals that hardened only when they chose, healing chambers where the injured floated in special currents that mended wounds and extended life far beyond mortal spans. In your world, kingdoms rise and fall like waves upon the shore, she said solemnly. Here, time flows differently. I have witnessed the birth of mountains and their eventual crumbling into sand. I have seen empires bloom and wither like seasonal flowers. Your kind calls us immortal, though we simply exist outside the currents of time that carry your lives so swiftly from birth to death. As they reached the central palace, a structure that seemed built from solidified moonlight, the lady turned to face Thorne directly. You wonder why I have brought you here, when countless generations of mortals have lived and died without glimpsing our realm. The answer is simple yet profound. A threat approaches that endangers both our worlds, and the ancient prophecies speak of a warrior from the surface who bears the mark of deep waters in his eyes. The lady led Thorne into the heart of her palace, a circular chamber whose domed ceiling reflected the lake's surface above. At the center stood a pedestal of smooth black stone, upon which rested a sphere of water that somehow maintained its perfect round shape without container. Within the sphere, images shifted and swirled, scenes of destruction that made Thorne's blood run cold. The balance between realms weakens, the lady explained, her voice grave. For millennia, your world and mine have existed in harmony, each unaware of the other, save for rare moments of crossing. But now something ancient stirs in the spaces between, a force called the Void, which seeks to consume both our kingdoms. The sphere showed dark tendrils creeping across both land and waterways, withering everything they touched. Forests blackened, lakes dried to cracked earth, and creatures both mortal and magical fell before this spreading corruption. Thorne watched in horror as the vision showed Ardenmere itself crumbling, the castle where he had served faithfully reduced to ash and rubble. This cannot be prevented by either realm alone, the lady continued. The prophecies speak of a union between water and earth, between immortal wisdom and mortal courage. They speak of you, Thorne of Ardenmere, whose dreams have been touched by our calling since before your birth. Thorne stared at her, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what he was being told. I am but one warrior, he said finally. How could I possibly stand against this? He gestured toward the sphere and its visions of apocalypse. Alone. You cannot, she replied. But I offer you a pact, a binding of your mortal strength with my immortal magic. Such unions are rare and not without cost, but they have saved both our realms in ages past. She waved her hand, and the sphere changed to show ancient heroes, men and women who glowed with an inner light as they stood against darkness. What would this pact entail? Thorne asked cautiously, warrior's instinct making him wary of agreements, whose terms remained unclear. The lady's expression grew solemn. I would bestow upon you powers no mortal has wielded in 1,000 years. Command over water in all its forms, insight into the deepest secrets of both realms, strength beyond, mortal limits and wounds that heal with the speed of flowing currents. And the cost? Thorne pressed, knowing instinctively that such gifts would demand payment. 3 bonds will form between us, she replied. First, a bond of purpose. You must use these gifts to fight the void wherever it manifests. Second, a bond of essence. Part of your mortality will be surrendered to the waters, changing you in ways you cannot yet comprehend. And third, she hesitated, her eyes growing distant. A bond of return. When your task is complete, you must answer the call of the waters. You will return to Nymeriel, permanently. Thorne felt the weight of her words like a physical burden. To save his kingdom, he would have to eventually abandon it. How long would I have before this return? That depends on how swiftly the void is defeated, she answered. Perhaps years, perhaps decades. But the call will come, and when it does, no force in either realm can prevent your return to the waters. The chamber fell silent as Thorne contemplated the lady's offer. To accept meant saving his kingdom but eventually abandoning it, trading a mortal's death for something else entirely. To refuse meant returning to Ardenmere powerless against the coming darkness. "I accept your terms," Thorne finally said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I will bear whatever burden necessary to protect my people." The lady nodded, a mixture of approval and something like sorrow crossing her otherworldly features. "Then let the binding begin." She approached the water sphere, dipping her fingers into its surface. The liquid clung to her hand, stretching and reshaping until she held a gleaming trident that seemed carved from a single massive sapphire, its 3 prongs etched with runes that pulsed with inner light. "This is Tidecaller," she said, "forged from the first rains that ever fell upon your world, tempered in the deepest ocean trenches, and imbued with the essence of storms. It has waited millennia for a worthy wielder." She held the weapon out to Thorne. "Once you take it, the pact will be sealed." Thorne reached for the trident, his fingers hovering momentarily above its crystalline surface. With a deep breath, he grasped the weapon. Immediately, power surged through him, cold, wild, and vast beyond comprehension. His veins glowed blue beneath his skin as water magic infused his mortal form. The sensation was both ecstasy and agony, like drowning and flying simultaneously. Thorne fell to his knees, gasping as his body transformed. His lungs adapted to breathe both air and water. His muscles densified with the pressure of ocean depths, and his senses expanded to feel every raindrop for miles around. Most startling of all, the blue of his eyes intensified until they glowed, with the same ethereal light as the lady's. When the transformation subsided, Thorne stood, changed. Though still recognizably human, an aura of otherworldly power surrounded him. The trident, initially heavy in his grasp, now felt like an extension of his arm, responding to his thoughts as much as his movements. "The gift is bestowed," the lady said, "but remember the threefold nature of our pact. What empowers also binds, what strengthens also changes. What grants freedom now will demand return later." She approached him again, placing her palm against his chest. "Within you now resides a fragment of Nymeriel itself, a reservoir of power you may draw upon in times of need. But heed this warning. Each time you call upon the full might of these waters, the bond of return strengthens. Use your gifts wisely, for every great working of magic brings your final departure closer." Thorne nodded solemnly, understanding the double-edged nature of his new powers. "How will I recognize the void when I encounter it?" "Your enhanced senses will detect its corruption," she explained. "It appears first as a subtle wrongness, water that refuses to flow naturally, plants that grow but provide no nourishment, creatures that move without true life. As its influence strengthens, the signs become unmistakable. Blackened earth, water that burns rather than nourishes, and skies empty of birds." Before Thorne could ask further questions, the lady raised her hand. "Dawn approaches in your world. You must return now and begin your vigil against the darkness. Remember, warrior of 2 realms, you walk a path between worlds now, neither fully mortal nor truly immortal." With these words, she waved her hand, and Thorne felt himself rising rapidly through the waters, the magnificent underwater kingdom blurring around him as he ascended toward the surface. Thorne emerged from the lake as the first rays of dawn broke over the forest. Standing on the shore, he examined his transformed body and the magnificent trident in his hand. Though the weapon appeared made of solid crystal, it weighed little more than a standard spear. When he wielded it, the trident could shrink to the size of a dagger, which he secured at his belt before beginning the journey back to Ardenmere. The changes were immediately apparent. He moved with newfound grace, each step precise and powerful. The forest seemed to speak to him through its streams and morning dew, whispering ancient secrets. When rain fell briefly during his return journey, each droplet seemed to acknowledge him, slightly altering its path as he passed beneath. Upon reaching the outskirts of the capital, Thorne observed signs that confirmed the lady's warnings. A small stream that had always flowed clear now carried an oily film that killed the reeds along its banks. Nearby, a stand of trees stood barren despite the season of full leaf. Most disturbing were the animals, unnaturally still, watching, him with eyes that reflected no light. The court hardly recognized their returning warrior. King Edric, startled by Thorne's altered appearance, demanded an explanation. Choosing his words carefully, Thorne spoke of discovering an ancient power in the forest depths, a weapon that could combat the strange blight already creeping into their lands. He demonstrated his abilities by calling a sphere of water from a nearby basin, shaping it into perfect replicas of the castle towers before returning it without spilling a drop. The old prophecies speak of a blue-eyed guardian, whispered the court mystic who had observed the demonstration with awe. One who commands the waters and stands between our world and darkness. Over the following months, Thorne's reputation grew from respected warrior to living legend. When raiders finally attacked from across the eastern sea, he stood alone at the harbor, raising a massive wave that capsized their ships before they could reach shore. When drought threatened the summer harvest, he summoned gentle rains that saved the crops but somehow avoided flooding the low-lying fields. Most spectacular was his battle against the first major manifestation of the void, a shapeless horror that emerged from a corrupted lake to the north. Villagers spoke of a clash that lasted 3 days, with water and darkness battling for supremacy. When Thorne returned victorious, his legend was cemented forever in the kingdom's lore. King Edric offered him titles, land, even the hand of his daughter in marriage, but Thorne declined all rewards. "I serve the kingdom as I always have," he would say, only now with greater means to do so. Though he didn't speak of it, Thorne remembered the third bond of his pact, the bond of return. How could he accept a noble title or take a wife when an uncertain deadline hung over his mortal existence? As months stretched into years, Thorne traveled throughout the kingdom and beyond, seeking manifestations of the void and destroying them, with increasingly spectacular displays of power. Songs were written about his exploits, and children played at being the water warrior in village squares. Few noticed how the blue glow in his eyes intensified with each major battle, or how he sometimes gazed longingly at ordinary lakes and rivers. Even fewer observed his growing detachment from mortal concerns. The warrior who had once enjoyed simple pleasures, good ale, hearty meals, companionship around evening fires, now seemed to require nothing but his mission. Food and drink held little appeal, sleep became rare, and though he remained unfailingly courteous, an otherworldly distance had crept into his interactions with former friends and comrades. 5 years passed, and Ardenmere flourished under King Edric's rule with Thorne as its supernatural protector. The Void's advances had been pushed back beyond the kingdom's borders, though never fully eradicated. Each victory brought peace to more lands, yet each use of Thorne's full power drew him closer to his inevitable departure. The first sign of the change appeared on Midwinter's night during a celebration of the season. As musicians played and nobles danced, Thorne stood by a window, gazing at the snow-covered courtyard. Suddenly, he clutched his chest and stumbled. A servant rushed to assist him, but Thorne waved him away with a forced smile. Only Thorne knew. The truth, for a moment, he had felt his heart stop beating, replaced by a sensation of cool water flowing through his chest. These episodes increased in the following months. Sometimes, while walking through the castle, Thorne would find himself inexplicably wet, as though he had just emerged from a lake, though no water source was nearby. Other times his skin would become translucent, revealing not blood and bone beneath, but swirling currents and strange aquatic lights. The most alarming symptom was the song, a distant, haunting melody that only he could hear. It would begin as a faint humming, barely perceptible over the sounds of daily life. But in quiet moments, especially near dawn and dusk, the melody would strengthen, carrying wordless promises of peace beneath the waters. More than once, castle guards had found Thorne standing waist-deep in the ornamental fountain, unaware of how he had gotten there. "You are changing faster than expected," the court mystic told him privately after witnessing one such episode. "The water claims more of you with each passing day. Have you considered what this means?" Thorne nodded solemnly. "The lady warned me. Each time I draw deeply from the power, the bond of return strengthens. I have fought many battles against the void these past years. And yet you continue to use this power, the mystic observed, even for minor threats that our soldiers could handle. The kingdom needs protection, Thorne replied simply. Though deep within he recognized another truth, he had grown addicted to the sensation of power flowing through him, to the reverence in people's eyes when he performed feats beyond mortal capacity. As spring arrived, bringing new life to the land, Thorne found himself increasingly drawn to bodies of water. Where once he had enjoyed riding across open plains or climbing mountain paths, now he felt comfortable only near rivers, lakes, or even the castle moat. His skin would dry painfully if away from moisture for too long, and on several occasions, servants reported finding small fish swimming in his bathwater, fish that had not been there when the bath was drawn. King Edric, now with streaks of grey in his beard, grew concerned about his champion's strange behavior. "You have served this kingdom beyond all expectation," he told Thorne during a private audience. "Perhaps it is time for you to rest, to train others who might continue your work." But Thorne knew what the king did not, that the void, though driven back, was gathering strength for a massive assault. His water sense could feel darkness pooling beneath the earth, corrupting groundwater, and preparing to erupt with devastating force. The final battle approached, one that would require every drop of his power, and likely trigger the final bond of his pact. One night, unable to sleep, Thorne stood on the castle's highest tower, gazing at the moon reflected in the river below. As if in response to his vigil, the water's surface rippled unnaturally, forming the unmistakable silhouette of the lady. Though no words crossed the distance between them, her message reached him clearly. "Prepare, warrior. The time of choosing draws near." As summer reached its peak, Thorne's condition worsened. His moments of humanity grew shorter, while his aquatic nature strengthened. Sometimes he would speak in strange, gurgling tones that reminded listeners of water flowing over stones. His footsteps left damp impressions even on the driest ground, and small plants sprouted wherever he lingered too long, nourished by the moisture that perpetually surrounded him. Dreams became his most difficult battle. Each night, the Lady of the lake would visit his sleeping mind, showing him the glories of Nemeriel, its timeless beauty, its peaceful existence outside the petty conflicts of the mortal realm. "Your place awaits," she would whisper, as coral palaces and luminescent gardens filled his vision. "A throne beside mine, knowledge beyond mortal comprehension, and rest from your endless battles." Upon waking, Thorne would find his chambers transformed, furniture encrusted with barnacles, small pools forming in the corners, and tiny crustaceans scuttling across the stone floor. The castle staff whispered that his quarters had to be completely dried and cleansed each day, only to find the same oceanic transformation by the next morning. During this time, Thorne began to withdraw from court life. The noise and activity of humans, once his people, now grated on senses attuned to the subtle rhythms of water. Conversations seemed pointlessly brief and shallow compared to the deep communion he had experienced in Nemeriel. Yet something within him still resisted the call, a stubborn ember of humanity that refused to be extinguished. "What holds you here?" the court mystic asked during one of their increasingly rare conversations. "You suffer in our world now? Anyone can see it." Thorne gazed out the window at children playing in the castle courtyard. "Purpose," he replied after a long silence. "I made a vow to protect this kingdom. The void still threatens." "Is that all?" pressed the mystic. "Or do you fear what awaits beyond the final transformation?" The question struck deeper than the old sage could know, for despite the lady's promises of glory in the underwater realm, Thorne harbored a terrible suspicion that once fully claimed, by the waters his memories of mortal life would fade, along with the very self that had made the pact. Would he still be Thorne of Ardenmere, or merely a vessel carrying the water's power? This suspicion crystallized into certainty when King Wym, Edric's youngest daughter, fell desperately ill. The king, hair now more silver than brown, summoned Thorne to her bedside in desperation. The physicians say nothing can be done, Edric explained, tears streaming into his beard. But surely your powers... Thorne placed his hand above the feverish child, sensing the imbalance within her small body. With gentle focus, he drew the sickness out, absorbing it into his own increasingly inhuman form, where it dissipated harmlessly. The girl's breathing steadied, her color returned, and when her eyes fluttered open, the entire court rejoiced. All except Thorne, who stood motionless, stunned by a realization. As he healed the child, he had felt nothing, no compassion, no relief, no connection to the human drama unfolding before him. He had acted out of memory rather than emotion, following the pattern of what the human Thorne would have done. The waters were not just changing his body, they were washing away his humanity itself. That night, torn between worlds, Thorne sought solitude in the castle gardens. Kneeling beside a small pond, he gazed at his reflection. The glowing eyes, the skin now faintly scaled, the hair that moved like seaweed even in still air. What am I becoming? He whispered to the waters. As if in answer, ripples formed across the pond's surface, and a familiar voice echoed in his mind. You are becoming what you were always meant to be. Neither fully mortal nor immortal, but a bridge between realms. The transition is difficult, but necessary. And when it is complete, Thorne asked, will anything of who I am remain? The ripples stilled, and in their perfect mirror, Thorne saw, not his current self, but a vision of what awaited. A being of water and light, powerful beyond imagining, ageless and serene, and utterly devoid of the passions, doubts, and connections that defined his human existence. As autumn painted the forests in gold and crimson, reports arrived of strange activities near the northern borders. Villages abandoned overnight. Livestock found desiccated, as if every drop of moisture had been drawn from their bodies. And wells that filled with black, viscous liquid instead of water. The void was making its final move, more aggressive and widespread than ever before. King Edric called his war council, but Thorne already knew what must be done. This is not a battle for ordinary soldiers, he told the assembled nobles and generals. The corruption has taken root too deeply. I must face this threat alone. You cannot stand against an entire army of darkness by yourself, argued the captain of the guard, a young woman who had risen through the ranks during Thorne's years of service. Let us fight beside you, as is our duty. Thorne shook his head, water droplets falling from his hair to form perfect circles on the stone floor. Where I must go, you cannot follow. What I must become to defeat this enemy you should not witness. He looked at each face around the table. Men and women he had trained with, fought beside, shared meals with in better times. Soon, he realized, he might remember their faces, but not the feelings that had once bound them together. The king approached Thorne after the council disbanded. You speak as one who does not intend to return, Edric said quietly. Is this your final battle, old friend? One way or another, Thorne replied, his voice containing the echo of distant tides. The lady calls more strongly each day. After this confrontation, I doubt I will have the strength or the will to resist much longer. Edric nodded, grief evident in his weathered face. Then go with the kingdom's blessing, and know that songs of the water warrior will be sung here until the stones of this castle crumble to dust. In Thorne gathered minimal supplies for his journey north, more from habit than necessity, as his body now required little nourishment beyond proximity to water. The trident tide caller, which had hung unused in his chambers for months, hummed with anticipation as he took it in hand. The weapon had grown as he had, its crystal surface now flowing like liquid even in solid form. As he prepared to depart at dawn, Thorne found the court mystic waiting by the castle gates. I have studied the ancient texts since you first returned. From the enchanted lake, the old sage said without preamble. There is something you should know before you face the void. The mystic handed Thorne a small leather pouch. Inside was a simple amulet made of dark stone, etched with symbols similar to those Thorne had seen on the white stones surrounding the Lady's Lake. This talisman was created by those who encountered the water realms in ages past, It cannot break your pact, but it may allow you to maintain your identity during the final transition. How? Thorne asked, examining the strange artifact. The bond of return requires you to answer the call of the waters, but it does not specify what part of you must return, the mystic explained. Wear this when you face your greatest challenge. It creates a vessel for your mortal memories and emotions, a sanctuary within yourself that the waters cannot simply wash away. Before Thorne could thank him, the mystic added a cryptic warning. Remember, water warrior, even the Lady of the Eye. Lake serves greater powers. There are currents deeper than those she has shown you, purposes beyond those she has revealed. The journey north took 3 days, during which Thorne felt the pull of the lady growing ever stronger. Twice he awoke to find himself half submerged in nearby streams, with no memory of how he had gotten there. The amulet, worn against his skin, seemed to burn slightly when such episodes occurred, as if fighting to maintain the boundary between his mortal and immortal aspects. On the 4th day, Thorne reached the source of the corruption, a massive crater where a mountain had once stood, now filled with a substance that resembled water but absorbed all light that touched it. Around this dark pool, the land had withered in perfect concentric circles, creating a blighted zone that stretched for miles. At the center of the pool stood a figure that seemed formed from the anti-water itself, humanoid but constantly shifting, with voids where eyes should be. Water warrior, it spoke, its voice the sound of drought cracking the earth. I have waited for you. What are you? Thorne demanded, readying tide caller. I am what exists where water does not, the entity replied. I am thirst unquenched, rain denied, life withered. I am the void that balances your lady's abundance. The creature gestured around at the blighted landscape. Your power or mine must prevail here today. But first, a choice. The dark pool rippled, and within its depths, Thorne saw 2 visions. In one, he surrendered fully to the waters, becoming a being of pure aquatic power that easily vanquished the void but retained nothing of Thorne's human identity. In the other, he rejected the final transformation, fighting as a mortal with only the powers he had already mastered. Likely dying in the process, but dying as himself. Choose, hissed the void. Godhood or humanity, power or identity. There is no middle. Pitath? Thorne stared into the abyssal pool, the 2 visions swirling before him like opposing currents. The amulet against his chest burned cold, a reminder of the mystic's warning. Closing his eyes, he reached deep within himself, past the layers of water magic that had transformed him, searching for the core of who he truly was. You present a false choice, Thorne finally said, opening eyes that now blazed with blue fire. I am neither merely human nor merely water. I am the bridge between realms. That is the true purpose of the pact. The void entity hissed, its form rippling with agitation. There is no middle path. Choose or be consumed. I reject your terms, Thorne declared, raising Tidecaller high. The trident responded to his resolve, its crystal surface flowing like quicksilver as blue lightning crackled between its prongs. I will fight as what I am, both mortal and immortal, both warrior and water. With a roar of defiance, the void launched its attack. Tendrils of anti-water shot toward Thorne, each touch leaving painful desiccation in its wake. Thorne countered by summoning a whirling shield of purified water, then charged forward to engage the entity directly. The battle that followed defied description in human terms. Mortal witnesses would later speak of storm clouds gathering with unnatural speed, of lightning that struck upward from the ground into the sky, of rain that fell in geometric patterns rather than natural droplets. Some claimed the very land rippled like water during the conflict, while others reported seeing 2 titanic figures, one of pure light and flowing water, the other of absolute darkness, wrestling within a tornado that touched both earth and clouds. What none could witness was the internal battle Thorne fought simultaneously. With each surge of power he drew from the watery realm, the lady's call grew stronger. Her voice filled his consciousness, urging complete surrender to the transformation. Let go of your mortal limitations, she whispered. Become the water, entirely, and victory will be effortless. The amulet burned against his skin, creating a small sanctuary within his mind where his human memories remained untouched by the waters. There, he held onto fleeting images, his father's forge, his first battle alongside King Edric, children playing in Ardenmere's streets, the face of a woman he had once loved but never told. For hours, the external and internal battles raged. The void entity was immensely powerful, drawing strength from every drop of water it corrupted. Yet Thorne fought with the unique advantage of his dual nature. Unpredictable to the entity, because he himself did not know which aspect of his power would manifest from one moment to the next. As dusk approached, Thorne realized he was winning the physical battle, but losing the internal one. The waters were claiming him faster than ever, memories dissolving like salt in the tide. In desperation, he clutched the amulet and made a final decision. "I accept the bond of return," he declared, "to the unseen lady, but on my terms." With this declaration, Thorne gathered every drop of water power he possessed. Not just what he had been granted through the pact, but the essence of water itself that now comprised much of his being. He poured this power into Tidecaller until the trident glowed like a fallen star. "Return to the void from which you came," Thorne commanded, driving the trident into the heart of the dark entity. The resulting explosion sent a shockwave across the landscape, transforming the corrupted anti-water into purified rain that fell for miles around, healing the blighted land wherever it touched. When the light faded, the void entity had vanished. Victory was complete, but Thorne knew the cost immediately. His body was now more water than flesh, his thoughts flowing rather than fixed. Only the amulet, glowing softly against his chest, maintained a tenuous connection to his human self. "It is time," came the lady's voice, no longer just in his mind, but surrounding him on all sides. The very air seemed to liquefy, creating a shimmering portal in which her form appeared. She extended her hand toward him, more beautiful and terrible than he remembered. "The third bond is fulfilled. You must return to Nimeriel." Thorne nodded, knowing resistance was no longer possible. His mortal life was effectively over. Only his memories remained, preserved by the mystic's amulet. Yet as he stepped toward the portal, he glanced back at the land he had protected for so long. "I have one request," he said to the lady, his voice the sound of gentle rain. "Allow me to say farewell." The lady's expression softened slightly. "One day and night, no more. Then you must come to the lake where we first met. What remains of your mortal form will be fully transformed, and you will take your place in Nimeriel. Forever." Thorne bowed his head in acceptance and turned toward Ardenmere for one final journey. Dawn broke over Ardenmere as Thorne approached the castle gates for the last time. Guards who had known him for years barely recognized the figure that now stood before them, a being whose form seemed to shift between solid and liquid with each step, whose eyes contained the depths of oceans, whose voice rippled like water over stones. "I must speak with the king," Thorne said simply. The guards, awestruck and a little fearful, escorted him without question. King Edric received him in the private royal garden, rather than the throne room, a kindness that touched what remained of Thorne's human heart. The king had aged visibly in the weeks since Thorne's departure, the burden of leadership etching deeper lines around his eyes. "The void is defeated," Thorne announced, his words causing the fountain nearby to pulse in rhythm with his speech. "The northern lands will heal in time. Your kingdom is safe." Edric studied his transformed champion with sorrowful understanding. "But you are not returning to us, are you?" "I cannot," Thorne replied, raising a hand that was now translucent, water flowing visibly through what appeared to be skin. "The final bond of my pact must be honored. By tomorrow's dawn, I must return to the enchanted lake. What you see before you is temporary." The king nodded, grief mingling with gratitude in his weathered face. "Then Ardenmere will hear your tale and honor your sacrifice for generations to come. What would you have us remember?" Thorne considered this question carefully, touching the amulet that preserved his human memories. "Remember that boundaries between worlds are thinner than they appear. Remember that power always demands sacrifice. And remember that, even when called to become something greater, one need not surrender everything that made them who they were. Throughout that final day, Thorne visited those who had meant most to him, his fellow warriors, the court mystic, who had provided the amulet, and finally, the village of his birth, where his father's forge still stood, now operated by apprentices who knew his name only from legends. As twilight approached, Thorne made his way to a hillside overlooking the capital. From this vantage point, he could see the castle spires, the town marketplace, farmlands stretching to the horizon, and distant mountains catching the last rays of sunset. This land, these people, had been worth every sacrifice. When night fell, Thorne began his final journey to the enchanted lake. With each step, his form became less solid, his thoughts less linear. By the time he reached the ring of white stones surrounding the perfectly circular water, he moved like living current, rather than a man. The lady awaited him at the center of the lake, her beauty more captivating than ever to his transforming senses. "You have fulfilled all bonds of our pact," she said, extending her hands toward him. "Now complete your journey and take your place in Nemeriel." Thorne stepped onto the lake's surface, which supported him as if solid. With each step toward the lady, more of his human form dissolved into the waters below. Yet the amulet still glowed against what remained of his chest, preserving something essential within the transformation. "You have changed," observed the lady as he reached her. "The waters should have washed away all traces of your mortal self by now, yet something remains." "I'm Thorne of Ardenmere," he replied, his voice now indistinguishable from the lapping of water against shore. "And I will remain Thorne even in your eternal realm. The bond requires my return, not my erasure." For a moment, it seemed the lady might object. Then, surprisingly, she smiled, a genuine expression that softened her otherworldly features. "In all the ages of such pacts, none have thought to make this distinction. Perhaps this is why the prophecies spoke specifically of you." With these words, she took his now fluid hands in hers. The lake parted beneath them, revealing the shimmering staircase to Nemeriel. As they descended together, Thorne felt the final transformation complete, his body becoming fully water, his consciousness expanding to sense every raindrop and ocean current across the world. Yet within this vast awareness, protected by the mystic's amulet, remained the core of who he had been, his memories, his values, his identity. He was now both more and less than human, an immortal being of water who remembered what it meant to be mortal. In the centuries that followed, tales of the water warrior spread throughout the human realm. Some said he had died battling the void. Others claimed he had ascended to become a god. In Ardenmere, however, they told a different story, of a champion who had sacrificed his humanity but preserved his humanity's heart. And sometimes, when the kingdom faced its darkest hours, when drought threatened or enemies massed at the borders, rain would fall in perfect patterns, or rivers would rise to block invading armies, or healing waters would spring from barren ground. Though the water warrior never returned in physical form, the people of Ardenmere knew their protector watched over them still, from a realm just beyond the veil of ordinary water. So ends our tale of the Lady of the Lake and the mortal warrior, a reminder that we are defined not by what powers we gain or lose, but by what values we preserve through transformation. In the space between realms, in the boundary between human and divine, true heroism lies in remembering who we are, even as we become something more. Thank you for listening, dear dreamer. If you enjoyed tonight's journey through myth and magic, please remember to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment telling us where in the world you're listening from. Tomorrow night, we'll explore another ancient legend to carry you into peaceful slumber. Until then, may your dreams be filled with enchanted waters and courageous hearts.